And now that fall is officially here, it's time to start thinking about your garden for the fall season.
Behind it, if you've already got soil and you've already run through a season of vegetables and you're going to do a fall garden.
We're going to put things on that'll look lovely in the fall and also give you some seasonal interest with some Halloween pumpkins.
Even though it doesn't feel like fall, the fall gardening season is in full swing.
While most people might prefer to garden in the spring and summer, some plants can thrive any time of the season.
If your tomatoes are slowing down, your cucumber vines look exhausted, and half your garden seems ready for the compost pile, you might think the growing season is basically over. But don't give up on your garden just yet. September can be one of the most valuable planting windows of the entire year. The trick is that you have to stop thinking like a summer gardener and start planting like a fall gardener, because while tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, squash, and other heat-loving crops may be approaching the end of their season, another group of vegetables is just entering conditions it loves. Cooler nights can make leafy greens easier to grow. Warm soil can still help seeds germinate quickly. Some insect pressure may begin declining as the season progresses, and several vegetables can go from seed to harvest surprisingly fast. Some even become sweeter after exposure to cool weather. But there is one important warning. September planting is not the same everywhere. This is a general September planting guide. Your exact planting window depends on your climate, expected first frost date, local growing zone, current temperatures, and whether you can protect plants with things like row covers, cold frames, mulch, or movable containers. If you garden in a warm climate with a long fall, September may be the beginning of an entirely new growing season. If you live somewhere with an early frost, your choices are narrower. You'll want to prioritize fast-growing vegetables, baby greens, and established transplants instead of crops that need months to mature. September is a transition month, and that transition can work in your favor. During summer, the soil absorbs an enormous amount of heat. Even when daytime temperatures begin falling, the ground doesn't instantly become cold. That lingering soil warmth can help many seeds get established. At the same time, the air is becoming cooler. For vegetables such as lettuce, spinach, kale, radishes, turnips, and carrots, that's often a much more comfortable combination than the extreme heat of midsummer. Think about lettuce. Try growing tender lettuce through scorching summer weather, and you may spend your time fighting wilting, bitterness, and bolting. But as temperatures moderate, lettuce becomes much easier to manage. The same general principle applies to several crops we're covering today. Cool weather can also improve the eating quality of certain vegetables. Plants such as carrots and kale can accumulate more sugars under cool conditions, which is one reason fall harvested crops can taste noticeably sweeter. But September gardening is a race against something summer gardeners don't have to worry about nearly as much. The calendar, the days are shortening, temperatures are declining, growth will gradually slow. So September is not the month to randomly plant every seed packet you didn't use in spring. It's the month to plant strategically. And that brings us to the single most important rule in this entire video. Before you plant anything, find your average first fall frost date. Then look at the number of days remaining between today and that date. That's your basic planting window. Next, check the seed packet or plant label for something called days to maturity. Suppose your first expected frost is roughly 50 days away. A radish variety listed at around 25 to 30 days has a very different chance of producing a harvest than a vegetable requiring 90 days. But don't treat those numbers like a guaranteed countdown timer. Days to maturity are useful estimates, and growth can slow as daylight decreases and temperatures fall. So whenever possible, give yourself some extra time. There is another trick that makes September planting much more flexible. You don't always need a fully mature vegetable. Lettuce, spinach, arugula, turnip greens, beet greens, and several other crops can be harvested young. Maybe you don't have enough time for a giant head of lettuce. You could still have enough time for tender baby leaves. And then there are transplants. If you sow broccoli seeds in September in a region expecting frost soon, you may simply run out of growing time. But a broccoli transplant from a nursery has already spent several weeks growing. You're essentially buying yourself time. That's why throughout this list, you'll notice a pattern. Fast vegetables like radishes and arugula are usually direct sown. Slower fall vegetables like broccoli and cabbage are often smarter to plant as established transplants, especially in colder climates. Once you understand that difference, September gardening gardening becomes much easier. There is another mistake beginners make. They plant their fall garden exactly like their spring garden. The conditions aren't the same. In spring, your challenge is often cold soil that needs to warm up. In September, the soil may still be surprisingly hot and dry after months of summer weather. That means tiny seeds can dry out very quickly. For freshly planted lettuce, spinach, carrots, radishes, or arugula, consistent moisture during germination is critical. You don't need to flood the bed. You want the upper layer of soil to remain gently and consistently moist while seeds germinate and seedlings establish. A light mulch around established plants can help conserve moisture, but avoid burying tiny newly planted seeds beneath a thick layer. September also brings shorter days. A vegetable that grows incredibly quickly in bright spring conditions may slow down as autumn progresses. Then there's frost. A forecast can change quickly, particularly in colder regions. A simple row cover can make a major difference during a light frost and can extend the usefulness of your fall garden. Containers are another surprisingly useful tool. If every raised bed is still occupied by tomatoes and peppers, you don't necessarily need to wait. Grow lettuce in a pot. Plant scallions in a window box. Put arugula in a shallow container. Then clear space gradually as exhausted summer crops finish. September gardening is about using the space and time you have rather than waiting for perfect conditions. With that covered, let's start with one of the quickest rewards you can get from a fall garden. Number 1, radishes. If you've never planted a fall vegetable before, start with radishes. They're fast, they're compact, and you can fit them almost anywhere. Many varieties mature rapidly enough to make radishes one of the safest choices when your frost window is getting short. And because radishes prefer cooler growing conditions, September can provide a much better environment than the middle of a hot summer. Plant radishes directly from seed. There's usually little reason to buy transplants because the root develops quickly and direct sowing is simple. Choose loose, well-draining soil. Hard or heavily compacted soil can interfere with root development, so loosen the top several inches before planting. Sow according to the spacing and depth on your seed packet, then keep the soil consistently moist while they germinate. Once seedlings emerge, don't be afraid to thin them. This is one of those jobs beginners hate because pulling a healthy seedling feels wasteful, but overcrowded radishes compete for space, water, nutrients, and light. Giving the remaining plants room can mean the difference between proper radishes and a bed full of leafy tops with disappointing roots. And don't leave mature radishes sitting in the soil forever. Harvest them young and tender. Radishes left too long can become woody, pithy, or unpleasantly spicy. For beginners, this is one of the best September vegetables because you don't have to wait months to find out whether your planting worked. And while radishes give you quick roots, our next vegetable can give you an even quicker harvest if you're willing to eat it young. Number 2, lettuce. Lettuce is almost made for the transition into fall. Summer heat can make lettuce difficult. High temperatures encourage many varieties to bolt, meaning the plant switches from producing the leaves you want to producing a flower stalk and seeds. That can also make the leaves more bitter. September's cooler conditions can change the situation dramatically. For beginners, loose leaf lettuce is usually one of the easiest options. Instead of waiting for one perfect head to form, you can begin harvesting individual leaves while the plant is still relatively young. And if your frost window is short, grow it specifically as baby lettuce. You can direct sow lettuce in a raised bed, container, or garden bed. If September is still hot where you live, give young lettuce some protection from intense afternoon sun. A location receiving morning sun and some afternoon shade can be extremely useful during that transition period. Moisture is equally important. Lettuce has relatively shallow roots, so don't let young plants repeatedly dry out. Once your plants are established, harvest the larger outer leaves while leaving the growing center intact. That allows the plant to continue producing. And here's an easy way to extend your harvest. Instead of sowing every lettuce seed on one day, plant a small batch, then another batch a week or two later if your climate gives you enough growing time. Now you have lettuce developing at different stages instead of one huge crop becoming ready at once. But if there's one leafy green even more strongly associated with cool weather, it's the next vegetable. Number 3, spinach. Spinach can be frustrating in summer and fantastic in fall. Hot weather encourages spinach to bolt, and high soil temperatures can also make germination difficult. As September temperatures decline, conditions become much more favorable, but timing matters. If you're in a warm climate and the soil is still extremely hot, don't assume the calendar automatically means spinach weather has arrived. You may get better results by waiting until temperatures moderate or starting your seeds somewhere cooler. Once conditions are suitable, spinach can be direct sown. Prepare a loose seed bed and keep it consistently moist during germination. That moisture matters because tiny seedlings can struggle if the surface repeatedly dries out. If winter is approaching quickly, don't wait for enormous leaves. Harvest baby spinach. You're taking advantage of one of the most useful strategies in a late season garden. Harvesting earlier rather than insisting every crop reach maximum size. In colder climates, row cover can help protect spinach as temperatures fall. And depending on your conditions, established spinach can tolerate surprisingly cool weather. The main beginner mistake here is planting into hot, dry soil and then assuming spinach is difficult because germination is poor. Sometimes the crop isn't the problem, the temperature is. And if you want a leafy green that's often even faster, number 4 deserves some space in your garden. Number 4, arugula. Arugula is one of the quickest ways to turn an empty patch of September soil into something edible. Its leaves have a distinctive peppery flavor, and young leaves can be harvested relatively quickly. Like lettuce and spinach, arugula isn't a huge fan of intense heat. In hot conditions, it can bolt rapidly. That's exactly why September can be such a good planting opportunity. Direct sow the seeds in loose soil. You can plant arugula in a raised bed, traditional garden, container, or even small gaps between slower growing vegetables. Because you're often harvesting the leaves young, you don't need to dedicate a giant section of the garden to it. If your September still feels like summer, use some afternoon shade. Keep the seedbed moist while it establishes, then harvest baby leaves when they're tender. The younger leaves tend to have a milder flavor, while older leaves can become more intensely peppery. Arugula is especially useful when you're looking at an empty garden bed thinking there isn't enough time left to grow anything. You may not have time for a pumpkin, but you could have plenty of time for a salad. Next, let's move to a crop that doesn't just tolerate cool weather. It can become one of the stars of the fall garden. Number 5, kale. Kale has earned its reputation as a reliable cool season vegetable. It's productive, cold-tolerant compared with many common garden vegetables, and you don't need to harvest the entire plant at once. In cooler regions, September is often a better time to use transplants because they give you a head start. In warmer climates with a long fall and winter growing season, direct sowing may still be completely practical. Give kale plants enough room. A tiny transplant may not look impressive now, but healthy kale can become a substantial plant. Keep the soil consistently watered while it establishes, and don't assume cooler weather means every pest has disappeared. Caterpillars, including common brassica pests, can still attack kale. Aphids can also become a problem. Check the undersides of leaves regularly. It's much easier to deal with a few pests early than an infestation after they've multiplied. When the plant becomes large enough, harvest the outer leaves first. Leave the central growing point intact. The plant can continue producing new leaves from the center, turning one kale plant into repeated harvests. And here's one of the reasons gardeners love fall kale. Exposure to cool temperatures can make the leaves taste sweeter. The plant responds to cold conditions in ways that can increase soluble sugars, which effectively act as part of its cold protection system. For you, that can mean better tasting kale, so don't automatically panic when nights become chilly. For some vegetables, that's when things get interesting. Number 6, Swiss chard. If your September weather can't decide whether it's still summer or already fall, Swiss chard can be a very useful middle ground crop. It handles warmth better than many cool season greens while also tolerating cool fall conditions reasonably well, and it's incredibly productive. Those bright red, yellow, pink, orange, or white stems can also make an autumn vegetable garden look surprisingly good. You can direct sow Swiss chard or plant transplants. If your growing window is short, transplants obviously obviously give you a head start. If you have a mild, long fall, seed works well. Swiss chard also performs nicely in containers, provided the container has enough depth and the plants aren't packed together. Keep moisture relatively consistent. When harvesting, take the larger outer leaves. Don't yank the entire plant from the ground unless you're intentionally ending the harvest. Leave the center growing and the plant can continue producing new leaves. That's an important fall gardening principle. A crop that gives you multiple smaller harvests can sometimes be more valuable than one that requires months to produce a single harvest. And our next vegetable gives you 2 different foods from one planting. Number 7, turnips. Turnips don't get nearly enough attention. Plant 1 seed and you can potentially harvest tender leaves above the soil and a root below it. That's excellent efficiency for a fall garden. Turnips are also relatively quick compared with many root vegetables, making them a strong September option in many regions. Direct sow them. Root vegetables generally don't benefit from having their young roots disturbed during transplanting. Prepare loose soil and sow according to your variety's instructions. Once seedlings appear, thin them. Again, thinning matters. If every turnip is fighting its neighbor for room, the roots won't develop as well. You can actually use some of those thinned seedlings as young greens rather than treating them as waste. Keep the soil consistently moist. Large swings between dry and wet conditions aren't ideal for tender root development, and don't feel like you have to grow enormous turnips. Baby turnips can be sweet, tender, and quick to harvest. The leaves are edible too and can be cooked like other greens. So when your September window is tight, harvesting smaller roots and greens can give you food sooner. Number 8 uses almost exactly the same 2-for-1 strategy. Number 8, beets. Beets are another vegetable where the leaves and the root are both edible. That makes them useful when you're trying to get maximum value from limited fall space. You can harvest a few young leaves while the roots continue developing, although you don't want to strip the plant bare. Beets prefer loose, well-prepared soil and consistent moisture. Direct sowing is common, particularly in mild climates. Transplants can also be used carefully when they're available, which may be useful when time is limited. But here's something beginners often don't realize about beet seeds. What looks like one seed in many common beet varieties is actually a seed cluster. That means one little object you planted may produce multiple seedlings. Suddenly, your perfectly spaced row looks overcrowded. That's normal. Thin the seedlings so the roots have room to expand. You can eat some of those young thinnings as greens. Keep weeds under control, especially while the plants are small, because weeds compete for moisture and light, and avoid letting the bed become bone dry between waterings. Beets are not as instant as radishes, so check the maturity time of the variety you're planting. If your first frost is approaching quickly, focus on faster varieties, baby beets, greens, or established transplants. And if you're willing to be a little more patient, September can also be the beginning of an excellent carrot harvest. Number 9, carrots. Carrots require patience. The seeds are tiny. Germination can feel painfully slow. And if you let the soil surface dry out at the wrong time, you can end up with a patchy row and no idea what happened. But get them established and fall carrots can be worth the effort. Start with the soil. Carrots grow best in loose, stone-free soil. If the root hits hard compaction or rocks, it may fork or become misshapen. This is particularly important in containers. If you're growing carrots in pots, consider shorter varieties that don't need extremely deep soil. Sow the seeds shallowly according to the packet directions, then focus on moisture. Until those seeds germinate, the upper layer of soil needs to remain consistently moist, not swampy. Not flooded. Just don't allow that delicate surface to completely dry out day after day. Once the seedlings grow, thin them carefully so each root has room. And yes, thinning carrots can feel painful too, but 20 tiny carrots packed into a space designed for 10 will not magically give you twice the harvest. In colder regions, mulch or row cover can help protect the crop as temperatures decline. Carrots can also become sweeter after exposure to cold temperatures. So this is one crop where a chilly night isn't necessarily bad news. Just make sure your variety has enough time to establish. If carrots sound like too much waiting, number 10 is much easier. Number 10, green onions or scallions. If you're gardening on a balcony, patio, patio, windowsill, or in a tiny raised bed, green onions should be high on your September list. They barely need any room. You don't have to wait for a giant bulb, and they work beautifully around the edges of containers and garden beds. You can grow scallions from seed, sets, or small transplants depending on what's available. Plant them in containers, window boxes, raised beds, or unused strips of soil along the edge of a larger bed. Keep the soil moist but not waterlogged. As they grow, you have options. You can harvest some green tops, taking care not to remove so much growth that you severely weaken the plant, or pull entire young onions when they're large enough for your needs. This flexibility makes scallions especially useful late in the season. You aren't waiting for one specific moment when a giant bulb becomes ready. You're growing something that can be useful while it's still young. For small space gardeners, that's exactly what you want. Now, number 11 technically spends time in the herb garden, but from a September planting perspective, it deserves a place on this list. Number 11, cilantro. If you've ever tried growing cilantro in the middle of summer and watched it immediately send up a flower stalk, September may be your chance for revenge. Cilantro dislikes prolonged heat. Hot weather can push it into flowering or bolting extremely quickly. As temperatures cool, cilantro generally stays leafy for longer. Direct sowing is usually the easiest approach because cilantro develops a taproot and doesn't always appreciate root disturbance. Plant seeds in a garden bed or container and keep the soil consistently moist while they germinate. If September is still hot where you live, some afternoon shade can help. Once the plants become established, harvest leaves regularly. In warmer climates with a long fall, you can sow another small batch every couple of weeks for a more continuous supply. And if your cilantro eventually bolts, the plant isn't necessarily wasted. Let the flowers develop and they can eventually produce coriander seed. So you can begin with cilantro leaves and potentially finish with coriander. That's a pretty good return from one plant. Our next crop is slower, which changes the September strategy. Number 12, parsley. Parsley is useful, cold tolerant compared with many tender herbs, and capable of giving repeated harvests. But it has one annoying habit. It can be slow to get started. That's why September gardeners, particularly those with shorter seasons, may be better off buying parsley transplants instead of starting from seed. A transplant immediately gives you weeks of growth you otherwise would have to wait for. Parsley works beautifully in containers. It also fits along garden edges where it doesn't compete heavily with larger vegetables. Keep the soil evenly watered while the roots establish. When you're ready to harvest, take the larger outer stems near their base rather than repeatedly cutting only the top leaves. Leave the center to continue producing. In colder regions, protection can extend your parsley harvest. A container is useful here because you have another option. Move it to a more protected location when temperatures become severe. That's one reason container gardening becomes especially valuable in fall. Mobility gives you flexibility. Now let's move to a vegetable that's incredibly productive when September weather cooperates, but much more dependent on your climate. Number 13, peas. Peas love cool conditions. They do not love extreme summer heat. So as temperatures fall in September, gardeners in the right climates may get another opportunity to grow them. But pay close attention to your first frost date here. Peas need more time than radishes or baby arugula. If hard freezes arrive early where you live, September may simply be too late for a meaningful crop. In areas with a long, mild fall, however, peas can be excellent. Choose a fast-maturing variety. Direct sow the seeds and keep the soil moist while they germinate. Give climbing varieties support from the beginning. A small trellis, netting, or another simple structure is enough for many varieties. It's much easier to provide that support before the vines become tangled than afterward. Peas can also grow in containers. Choose a container with adequate depth and give the plants something to climb. And here's where understanding your climate becomes more important than following a generic planting calendar. One gardener may plant peas in September September and get a beautiful crop. Another gardener several hundred miles away may plant on exactly the same day and run out of warm enough growing weather. Neither gardener necessarily did anything wrong. They simply had different frost windows, and that climate-dependent logic becomes even more important with our final two vegetables. Number 14, broccoli transplants. Broccoli loves cool growing conditions, but that does not mean you can throw broccoli seeds into the ground at the end of September and automatically harvest giant heads before winter. Broccoli needs time. That's why established transplants are usually the smarter September choice, particularly in colder climates. Look for healthy, sturdy nursery plants. Avoid badly root-bound plants or seedlings that already look stressed and weak. Plant them into fertile, well-draining soil at the appropriate depth. Firm the soil gently around the root ball and water thoroughly. Give them room. Broccoli becomes much larger than that little transplant suggests. Keep moisture consistent as the plant establishes. You also need to watch for cabbage worms and other caterpillars. Broccoli belongs to the Brassica family, and several common pests love it just as much as gardeners do. A row cover can help protect young plants from certain insect pests and can later provide some protection from light cold depending on the material you're using. If growth seems weak and your soil is poor, a modest feeding with an appropriate vegetable fertilizer can help, but don't assume more fertilizer always means more broccoli. Healthy soil, adequate moisture, sunlight, and enough growing time matter just as much. And time is the key. Broccoli likes cool weather, but the plant still has to become large enough to form a head. So if your first frost is close, don't start from scratch and expect miracles. Use transplants, choose faster varieties, and protect the plants when necessary. Which brings us to vegetable number 15. Number 15, cabbage transplants. Cabbage can turn an empty September bed into one of the most satisfying sights in a fall garden. But just like broccoli, this is usually not the crop to start casually from seed when winter is right around the corner. September gardeners in shorter season climates should look for healthy transplants. Those plants have already completed the slowest early part of their development. Choose smaller or faster maturing cabbage varieties when your growing window is limited. Plant them in fertile, well-draining soil. Give them proper spacing. Those tiny seedlings can eventually produce surprisingly large leaves, and overcrowding creates unnecessary competition and reduces airflow. Keep soil moisture consistent. Cabbage growth can suffer when plants repeatedly become severely dry and then suddenly receive large amounts of water. Watch for caterpillars as well. Those little holes appearing in the leaves aren't decorative. Inspect plants regularly, particularly the undersides of leaves, so you notice pest problems early. If frost threatens, appropriate row cover can help provide additional protection during light cold events. Cabbage isn't the fastest crop on today's list. It isn't something you plant today and harvest next week. But that's exactly why the September strategy matters. You don't treat cabbage like radishes, you don't treat broccoli like arugula, you match the planting method to the amount of time you have. And that is really the secret to the entire fall garden. September is not about squeezing another summer garden into a colder month. Before planting, check your first expected frost date. Read the days to maturity information for the specific variety you're growing. Remember that shortening days and colder temperatures can slow growth. Give yourself extra time whenever possible. Keep newly planted seeds consistently moist. Clear out tired summer plants that are no longer producing enough to justify their space. Use containers when your beds are full, and keep row cover, mulch, or another appropriate form of protection ready if cold weather is approaching. Most importantly, don't look at a fading tomato vine and assume your entire garden is fading with it. That tomato belongs to the summer garden. September is asking you to grow something different. You don't need to plant all 15 vegetables. In fact, you probably shouldn't. Choose the 3, 4, or 5 crops that make the most sense for your climate, your available space, and the number of growing days you realistically have left. Start with fast crops if you're unsure. Protect them when necessary, and learn what fall gardening looks like where you live. Because September isn't necessarily the end of the gardening season. For many gardeners, it's the final major opportunity to make the season count. And every day you wait is one less day those fall vegetables have to grow. So check your frost date, clear some space, grab the right seeds or transplants, and get planting while there's still time.